The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the afternoon as I settled into my cozy living room, anticipation bubbling within me. My phone buzzed relentlessly, and when I glanced at the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Lydia, my cousin, who had always been the life of the party, the one who could light up a room merely by walking into it. She was ecstatic about something, a family video she had come across, filled with memories that would surely tug at our heartstrings. With a smile dancing on my lips, I felt a surge of nostalgia, picturing the laughter and warmth that had once defined our gatherings. As I prepared to watch the video, I felt a flutter of excitement in my stomach. I grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders, and settled into my favorite spot on the couch, ready to immerse myself in the familial warmth that I hoped would radiate from the screen. The click of the play button sent a rush of anticipation coursing through me, and I leaned forward, eager to relive those cherished moments. The screen flickered to life, and I was greeted by familiar faces, all smiling and vibrant, their laughter echoing in my memories. But as the video unfolded, that initial thrill began to unravel, thread by thread. The smiles morphed, the laughter turned hollow, and the warmth quickly dissipated, replaced by a chilling realization. The montage was not a celebration, it was a cruel parody, a grotesque mockery of who I was. My heart plummeted as I watched my own reflection distorted through their jokes. The words cut deeper than I could have imagined. Pathetic loser, they called me, their voices dripping with scorn, laughter filling the spaces that had once been filled with love. Each chuckle felt like a dagger, twisting deeper into my heart, and I could hardly breathe as shame and disbelief washed over me. I felt small, exposed, and utterly betrayed. This was family? The people I had believed would always stand by me were now the architects of my humiliation. My mind raced with confusion and hurt as I replayed the video, desperate to make sense of the betrayal. I had supported them through thick and thin, offering financial help whenever they needed it, believing in the ties that bound us. How could they turn so easily into strangers, revealing the depths of their cruelty under the guise of familial love? The laughter echoed in my mind long after the screen went dark, haunting me as I grappled with the enormity of what I had just witnessed. I could feel the anger bubbling within me, a potent mix of rage and humiliation that demanded action. It was as if a switch had flipped inside me, illuminating a path I had never considered before. I had spent years sacrificing my own well-being to support this family, but now, I could see the reality of our relationships clearly. They had taken my kindness for granted, using it as fodder for their amusement. With each breath I took, clarity washed over me. I realized I had a choice: to continue allowing them to manipulate and humiliate me, or to reclaim my dignity by severing the ties that had bound me to their cruelty. The thought of cutting off financial support, a gesture I had extended so willingly for years, surged within me like a wildfire. It was a liberating thought, one that filled me with a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in ages. I knew it would send shockwaves through my family, sparking outrage and confusion, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control of my narrative. As I sat there, heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration, I understood that the time had come for me to prioritize my own well-being. The family I had devoted myself to was not the family I had once believed them to be. In that moment, I vowed to stand firm, to embrace the decision that would ultimately define my journey of self-discovery and empowerment. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them head-on. I would no longer be the punchline in their cruel jokes, I would be the architect of my own story. The news of my decision rippled through the family like a shockwave. I could almost feel the vibrations of their outrage from the moment I hit the send button on that email, officially severing the financial ties that had bound me to them for so long. I braced myself for the inevitable storm, knowing that Lydia and Uncle Harold would be the first to confront me. Their sense of entitlement was palpable, a thick fog that hung over our family, suffocating any semblance of empathy or understanding. When they arrived at my doorstep, their faces were a mixture of indignation and faux concern. Lydia's eyes darted around, searching for evidence of my weakness, while Uncle Harold stood with his arms crossed, a fortress of moral superiority. I could sense their anticipation, a desperate need to manipulate the narrative and cast me as the villain in this unfolding drama. They had rehearsed their roles well, ready to paint me as the selfish one, the one who turned her back on family in their time of need. It was a twisted kind of theater, and I was no longer willing to play my part. As they launched into their rehearsed speech, I felt a calm wash over me. Their attempts to guilt me only solidified my resolve. Each accusation felt like a dagger, but instead of wounding me, they ignited a fire within. They spoke of loyalty, of family bonds, as if those bonds had not been tainted by mockery and scorn. I had been the family's punching bag for too long, and now they wanted to portray me as the heartless one simply for wanting to reclaim my dignity. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh, but I held my composure, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. After their theatrical confrontation, I found solace in the arms of friends who, time and again, proved to be the family I had chosen. They enveloped me with warmth and understanding, offering words of encouragement that acted like a balm on my wounded spirit. I shared my story with them, revealing the depths of my humiliation, and they listened without judgment. Their compassion was the antidote I needed, a reminder that I was worthy of love and respect, even if my blood relatives failed to recognize it. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in activities that brought me joy and fulfillment. I rediscovered my passion for painting, the colors a vivid expression of the emotions swirling inside me. Each stroke of the brush was cathartic, allowing me to release the pent-up frustration and pain that had festered for years. I spent hours in my studio, the once silent space now alive with the sounds of my creativity. I adorned the walls with my artwork, each piece a testament to my journey of self-discovery and healing. As I painted, I reflected on the importance of surrounding myself with people who genuinely valued me. I began to create a circle of friends who uplifted me, who celebrated my victories, no matter how small. Their presence was a stark contrast to the toxicity of my family, and I cherished every moment spent in their company. We laughed, shared stories, and forged connections that felt authentic and real. I learned that family does not solely consist of blood relations, it encompasses those who support and encourage you to be your true self. With each passing day, I felt the weight of my family's expectations begin to lift. I was no longer bound by their disdain or their need to belittle me. Instead, I embraced my individuality, allowing myself to grow and evolve. I set new goals for my life, focusing on self-improvement and the pursuit of happiness. I began to envision a future where I was free from the shackles of my past, a life filled with possibilities where I could thrive without the shadow of my family's mockery looming over me. In this newfound clarity, I felt empowered. I was no longer the victim in their narrative, I was the author of my own story. As I prepared to step into a brighter future, I knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but I was ready to confront whatever challenges lay in my path. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, and the strength I had discovered within me would guide me through the darkness. As I stepped into the bustling family gathering, a mix of dread and determination washed over me. The air was thick with laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside me. I could feel the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on my shoulders, a familiar burden that had long since morphed into a choking grip. Lydia was there, her laughter ringing out with a practiced ease that I had once envied. But now, all I could see were the cracks in her facade, the lies she had woven around her life, and the secrets she desperately tried to keep hidden. I scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces that had, for so long, been a source of both comfort and pain. Their smiles felt forced, and I wondered how many of them were aware of the truth simmering just beneath the surface. I caught Lydia's eye across the room, and a jolt of adrenaline surged through me. The way she looked at me, filled with disdain and superiority, ignited a fire within. I was no longer the victim of their mockery, I was ready to reclaim my narrative. As the evening progressed, the conversations around me ebbed and flowed. I felt like a spectator in my own life, watching the drama unfold with an unsettling clarity. I could hear whispers about Lydia's life, the cracks in her perfect image becoming increasingly evident. The more I listened, the more emboldened I became. I had stumbled upon a secret that could shatter her carefully curated world, and while part of me relished the idea of exposing her, another part of me hesitated. Was I becoming the very monster I had fought against? The tension in the room thickened as Lydia approached me, her eyes glinting with a mix of malice and amusement. She wasted no time in belittling my choices, her words laced with venom. Each insult was a reminder of the torment I had endured, but instead of recoiling, I felt a surge of defiance. I stood my ground, determined to protect my dignity, even as her words clawed at my self-worth. I could feel the familiar sting of shame creeping in, but I pushed it down, reminding myself of the journey I had embarked upon. Lydia's words were a reflection of her own insecurities, and for the first time, I understood that her self-destructive behavior was a byproduct of our family's toxic dynamics. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the truth behind her bravado. She was not the confident cousin I had once envied, she was a woman trapped in a web of her own making, desperately trying to maintain an illusion that was crumbling around her. My heart ached for her, not out of pity, but out of a profound understanding. I realized that this confrontation was not just about me, it was about breaking the cycle of toxicity that had plagued our family for generations. As the evening wore on, I could feel the energy in the room shift. The laughter had faded, replaced by a tension that crackled like static in the air. I was no longer interested in playing the role of the victim, nor did I want to be the one who tore Lydia down. Instead, I sought to confront the truth, not just for myself, but for her as well. The thought of standing up for both of us filled me with an unexpected sense of purpose. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I could feel the eyes of my family on me, waiting for a reaction, a breakdown, or perhaps a moment of weakness. But instead, I was determined to rise. I had spent too long allowing their laughter and mockery to dictate my worth. I was ready to confront the truth, ready to expose the lies that had bound us all in this toxic web of dysfunction. In that moment, I felt the gravity of my decision weigh heavy on my heart. The stakes were high, but I was ready to embrace the chaos that lay ahead. I would no longer be a pawn in their game. It was time for the truth to emerge, not just for me, but for Lydia too. I could see it in her eyes, the fear, the desperation, and beneath it all, a flicker of hope. Perhaps, in unveiling her truth, I could help us both find a way out of this cycle of humiliation and pain. The atmosphere at the family reunion was thick with tension, a palpable weight that pressed down on my chest as I stepped into the chaotic space filled with familiar faces. I could feel the anticipation in the air, it buzzed around me like static electricity. The relatives who had once surrounded me with laughter now seemed to carry an unspoken agenda, their eyes darting between me and Lydia, who stood at the center of it all, wearing her carefully crafted mask of confidence. The contrast between her bravado and the underlying turmoil was striking, and I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me as I prepared to confront the truth. As I navigated through the sea of relatives, I caught snippets of conversations, half-whispered and laced with judgment. It was clear that my decision to withdraw financial support had shaken the very foundation of our family dynamics. I could see the flicker of disdain in some eyes, while others regarded me with a mix of curiosity and concern. Each step toward Lydia felt like a march toward a battlefield, and I braced myself for the impending confrontation that loomed closer with every heartbeat. Lydia, with her perfectly styled hair and a smile that barely reached her eyes, seemed to be holding court, her laughter ringing false in the air. I knew she was trying to reclaim her narrative, to paint me as the villain in this story, but I felt a growing resolve within me. The vulnerability I had once associated with our family gatherings was now replaced with a fierce determination to expose the lies that had entangled us all. My heart raced as I recalled the secrets I had uncovered, the truth that lay just beneath the surface of her polished facade. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew more charged. Lydia's laughter turned brittle as she attempted to engage with me, her desperation evident in her exaggerated gestures and forced smiles. I could see the cracks forming in her demeanor, the pressure of maintaining her perfect image beginning to weigh heavily on her. It was as if I could feel the tension radiating from her, and a part of me felt pity for the fragile person she was becoming. It was a delicate balance. I had to remind myself that her breakdown was a consequence of her own choices, a product of the toxic dynamics we had all perpetuated. Then, as the clock ticked on, I noticed a shift in the crowd. Conversations began to still, and the laughter that had filled the room faded into a tense silence. It was as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable clash that would break the surface. In that moment, I knew it was time. The truth had waited long enough, hidden beneath layers of deceit and humiliation. My pulse quickened, and I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had cultivated in the past weeks. As I stood before my family, the words found their way to the surface, fueled by a mix of anger and clarity. I addressed Lydia directly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I brought forth the truth of her affair, the secrets that had slipped through the cracks of our family's facade. The shock was instantaneous, rippling across the room like a wave crashing against a shoreline. Gasps replaced the laughter, and the room felt suspended in time as the reality of my words sank in. The expressions on my family's faces shifted from surprise to disbelief, and I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The power of exposing the truth was intoxicating. It was a release from the chains of humiliation that had bound me for so long. Lydia's mask crumbled before me, her expression shifting from shock to a desperate plea for control. I could see her world unraveling, and, in that moment, I understood the weight of the truth I had unleashed. As the murmurs grew louder, I felt the tension in the room evolve into something new. Questions began to bubble up, glances exchanged among relatives who had once stood firmly beside Lydia. I could see the cracks in their alliances forming, and for the first time, I felt a sense of vindication. The laughter had turned to gasps, and the power dynamics within our family were shifting before my very eyes. I stood there, a beacon of clarity amidst the chaos, ready to embrace the consequences of my actions. The reunion was no longer just a gathering, it was a turning point, a moment when the truth had finally emerged from the shadows, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The room was thick with tension as Lydia stood there, cornered by the truth I had just unleashed. Her face, once flushed with confidence, now bore the pallor of humiliation. I could see the gears turning in her mind, desperately searching for a way to regain control, to twist the narrative back in her favor. It was almost comical, the way her bravado faltered, but I felt no joy in her downfall. Instead, there was a heavy weight in the air, a collective inhalation of shock from the family that surrounded us. They had always been so quick to laugh, so eager to pile on during their mockery, but now they were forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. I could sense the shift in the dynamics, the cracks forming in the once impenetrable facade of family loyalty. Some eyes turned to me, a glimmer of support emerging from unexpected corners, while others shot daggers at Lydia, their allegiance wavering. I felt a strange sense of empowerment wash over me. This was the moment I had longed for, the moment I could finally reclaim my narrative and shatter the cycle of humiliation that had bound us all. Uncle Harold, ever the defender of the status quo, stepped in, his voice rising above the murmur of confusion. He attempted to shield Lydia with a shield of misplaced loyalty, his hypocrisy apparent to everyone in the room. His words dripped with the same condescension that had always characterized our interactions, and I felt a surge of defiance. How could he stand there, cloaked in righteous indignation, when he had been part of the very system that allowed this toxic behavior to thrive? I stood my ground, every fiber of my being urging me to speak out, to expose the hypocrisy for what it was. The family had long turned a blind eye to Lydia's manipulations, just as they had ignored my pain for years. Now, as I watched him flounder, desperately trying to salvage his niece's reputation, I realized that the tide was turning. The family was fracturing before my eyes, the cracks widening with each passing moment. As the chaos unfolded, some family members began to voice their support for me, a chorus of unexpected allies rising against the tide of Lydia's deceit. I caught glimpses of faces that had once looked upon me with scorn now softening, their expressions shifting from judgment to understanding. It was as if the blindfolds had been lifted, and they were finally seeing the truth for what it was. The laughter that once filled our gatherings was replaced by a palpable sense of discomfort, and in that discomfort, I found strength. Yet, even amid the shifting loyalties, I could feel Lydia's desperation radiating from her. She was clinging to the remnants of her facade, her bravado slipping away like sand through her fingers. I could almost hear the frantic heartbeat in her chest, the realization that her carefully crafted world was crumbling. There was a part of me that felt sympathy for her. After all, we had been raised in the same toxic environment, but that sympathy was overshadowed by the need to protect myself. The confrontation was escalating, emotions running high as family members took sides. Some were whispering to one another, their faces etched with concern, while others stood firm in their loyalty to Lydia, their expressions hardened. It was a chaotic scene, a whirlwind of emotions that forced everyone to confront the nature of their relationships. I could see the uncertainty reflected in their eyes, the questioning of their own beliefs and the roles they had played in this family's toxic dance. For the first time, I felt like I was on solid ground. I had faced the humiliation, and in doing so, I had unearthed a strength I never knew I possessed. The family was no longer a united front, it was a battleground of ideals, perspectives, and the deep-seated wounds we had all inflicted upon one another. As I absorbed the chaos, I realized that this confrontation was not just about Lydia or me, it was about breaking free from the chains of our past, about redefining what family truly meant. In that moment of upheaval, clarity washed over me. I understood that true connections are built on honesty and respect, not on laughter at the expense of others. As the family began to fracture, I felt a sense of liberation. I was reclaiming my narrative, and in doing so, I was also paving the way for others to do the same. The laughter that had once echoed in my mind now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the light of newfound understanding. The air was thick with tension after the confrontation, a palpable silence lingering among the family members as they processed the chaos that had just unfolded. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, but unlike before, it didn't suffocate me. Instead, it ignited a fire within. I watched Lydia shrink into herself, her bravado evaporating like mist in the sunlight. The facade she had crafted so meticulously was crumbling, and there was a strange sense of satisfaction in witnessing it. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, messages flooding in from my friends who had been following the drama unfold. Each notification was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I was supported, and that I had the strength to walk this path of self-discovery. As I stepped away from the chaos of the family gathering, I found a quiet corner outside the venue, the evening air cool against my skin. I took a deep breath, inhaling freedom, and exhaled the lingering fear and doubt that had shackled me for so long. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and it felt like the world was celebrating my newfound sense of self. The laughter and chatter of my family faded into the background, replaced by the echo of my friends' encouraging words. They had witnessed my transformation, and their unwavering support anchored me as I began to envision a future untainted by the toxicity of my past. The next morning, news of Lydia's affair hit the family like a storm. I had no part in spreading it, it seemed the truth had a way of surfacing, even without my interference. As I scrolled through social media, I saw posts that painted her in a harsh light, the very reputation she had built crumbling before her. I felt a mixture of pity and vindication. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our family's eyes. Now, the tables had turned, and her struggles were laid bare for everyone to scrutinize. As her relationships began to dissolve, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. My own journey of self-reclamation was intertwined with her unraveling, as if the universe was righting a wrong that had long been ignored. In the days that followed, I found myself surrounded by friends who uplifted me in ways I had never anticipated. We would gather at local coffee shops, sharing stories and laughter, creating new memories that filled the void my family had left. I reveled in the warmth of their camaraderie, feeling truly seen for the first time. The weight of familial expectations began to lift, and I realized that true family isn't defined by blood but by the loyalty and love we choose to cultivate in our lives. I stopped waiting for my family to come around. Instead, I embraced the freedom of choosing my own path. I pursued projects that excited me, took up hobbies I had shelved away, and began to invest time in relationships that nourished my spirit. I no longer felt the need to seek validation from those who had once mocked me. I was rewriting my narrative, one that celebrated resilience and authenticity. As I stood on the brink of this new chapter, I couldn't help but think of Lydia. The irony of her situation was not lost on me. While she was drowning in the consequences of her actions, I was finally swimming towards the surface, breaking free from the depths of humiliation and hurt. I hoped that one day she would find her way, too, but I wouldn't be the one to save her. That was a lesson I had learned well. I could only save myself. The journey ahead felt exhilarating, filled with possibilities and connections that were genuine. I was no longer shackled by the toxic family dynamics that had once defined me. Instead, I was carving out a space in the world that was entirely my own, where laughter was real and love was unconditional. As I embraced this newfound strength, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. The price of humiliation had been steep, but in reclaiming my dignity, I had uncovered a treasure far greater, my true self.